basically out before the war started.
Yes. Yeah. We left in October 38, and the war began a year later in September.
What brings you here, first of all?
To Jamestown?
Well, I guess you were giving a presentation last night, am I correct on that?
No, I'm giving it today.
Giving it today,
At the Holocaust Memorial for the Holocaust Commemoration Committee. And then tomorrow I'll be speaking to some students in Dunkirk, high school students, about the same subject.
What is it you have to say?
I had a special role in Nuremberg. I worked at the prison as a member of a security detachment, and I was one of 4 people who censored mail going in and out of the prison, so that I had access to letters coming to and from people like Goering, Hess, Ribbentrop. And my presentation will be based primarily on some of the gleanings I have from those letters.
Interesting. I bet you saw the gamut of writings, reflections. And
well, one of the strangest parts is these people were really quite different, but what they share is a kind of ironic doublethink, where what they were accused of, the atrocities most of them were accused of, are in total contrast to the warmth and love that they demonstrated toward their families, and which were reciprocated. And that's the gist of my address.
You've obviously had the chance to reflect and take a look at the photos and what's here at the Jackson Center. Quite obviously, Justice Jackson, in his role as prosecutor over there, was one of the first people really to bring out the atrocities that occurred in part with the Holocaust and what happened to the German people. Your thoughts about this center and what it means?
Well, of course, I think Justice Jackson was the moving force behind the International Military Tribunal, getting it going, which wasn't done overnight. There were meetings in London, there were preparations in Luxembourg. There were all sorts of plans which didn't work out, and when it was finally settled, I think most of the credit, if you will go to Justice Jackson. But his particular interest in these trials was count 1, which was aggressive war, labeling aggressive war as a crime. That was what he was concerned with most. Now the other counts, and there were 4, crimes against peace were handled by the English. And then the last 2, war crimes and crimes against humanity, were handled by the Russians and the French. Now, the latter ones sound much more serious, and in many ways they are. But I guess, speaking from a legal point of view, Jackson thought the aggression, the conspiracy, was the more cutting-edge issue. Now, this doesn't come from me. It's a recent article by a man named Kenneth Anderson, who was a true expert in this area. That's what I've just said comes from him.
Okay. Your thoughts about the center, what you've seen here that was put together?
I knew the center existed because I met Mr. Peterson some time ago, and he's talked about it, but I had no idea it was so luxurious and so vast and so well developed and so much going on here. I'm really impressed. And
what are your recollections of Justice Jackson, the type of person that he was, the type of person that was prosecuting also at Nuremberg?
Well, of course, I never met Justice Jackson. I was a private. Justice Jackson was slightly above me, even though he was not in the service. But my job was primarily working in an office. Now, I had a pass to go to the courtroom whenever I wanted, but I did not go that often because it's well known that the trial was not terribly exciting, partly because of Justice Jackson. Instead of depending primarily on witnesses, they depended on documents. So going to the courtroom meant you watched people shuffle documents. And the kind of scenes we just saw on the video here, where Jackson is interviewing people like Goering and Schacht, those were relatively rare. But 10 months of it was primarily paper shuffling.
You were a private in which branch of the service?
Army.
The Army?
Yeah, I was trained as an infantry reserve to go to the Pacific, but when the war ended, they shipped me over there, found out I knew some German, and had this job for me at the trials.
Was there any particular aspect of the trial or the work that you did over there that stood out to you? I know you mentioned that there was a lot of paper shuffling and so on. But
Well, that's
there must
in
have
the,
been some
Sure.
interesting memories from
Of course.
that time.
That was in the courtroom. There were exciting moments in the courtroom for which the press assembled. You know, the verdict, for instance, the interrogation of some of the major prisoners. But to me, it was the day in, day out routine of working in occupied Germany, of watching Germans who, while they didn't like us, much preferred us to the other occupying nations, especially the Russians, so that there was an exodus from the Russian zone to the American zone. As I make clear in my talk, I was 18, I was an immigrant, I suffered personal losses, so that I was not kindly disposed toward the Germans and their plight. Those are memories. Then there were memories of Nuremberg, which is a historic city, but at the time it was the old part of the city. The historic part was totally in ruins, and nothing was being done, and nothing happened until 1948, after I had left.
I was wondering, you had talked about leaving Germany and coming here. What was it like going back?
Rather exciting and kind of a surprise, because here I was, an adolescent immigrant boy, most of whose family had been exterminated. And here I was not only going back to Germany, but going to the trials. So I can't say I felt it was a feather in my cap, but it was a privileged position to observe things from that vantage point. And I learned a lot, and I evolved a lot, and in the intervening years, I'm still evolving.
How so?
Well, at the time, I was like the Russians, like Churchill. I thought these people should be hanged or shot or done away with immediately, and not just these people, but the generic group called Germans. And as the years passed, and I got a little older and a little wiser and went to college and read some people who really knew how to think, I developed a more magnanimous attitude. I'm against the death penalty. Although, as I point out in my talk, I haven't forgiven anyone, because I think forgiving is really not is a God-like endeavor. And besides, no one's asked me for forgiveness. No, I haven't forgotten either. And in these days, people should remember, because there's no end to it. And I hope talks like mine and what the Jackson Center is doing in part will somehow, if not eliminate, but somehow mitigate and make less frequent these scourges of killing.
Just for information, Doctor, where are you from, and are you an author?
No,
as well?
no. I have, this talk, I've given it about 4 times. Sometimes people tell me to write it out, and my response is that there's altogether too much writing going on out there. So I'll talk once in a while, but I'm not an author now. I'm a retired professor of French.
French?
Yes.
Interesting.
The German, at the time I decided on a major, German really wasn't very palatable. In the meantime, I've made my peace with Goering, not Goering, Goethe. terrible slip there. Goethe and Schiller and people who do something with German.
I'm going to pick up on, we had a great interview probably about a year ago at this time, and one of the areas which I did not at all have a chance to talk about was after the IMT was over, did you come back to the States?
Yes, I was discharged and went back to New York and trying to find a career for myself, but at the same time applied to return to Nuremberg as a civilian employee. And after giving up and working in Gimbel's basement, I got the call. And they, almost overnight I had to get ready. And they gave me an exam to me and to 12 others, which consisted of translating something in Time magazine. And of course I passed. Well, they flew us over. It took about 4 days to fly over with a DC-4, I think it was. We landed in Bermuda, in the Azores, in Paris, in Frankfurt. Finally made it to Nuremberg. They gave us another test. This time, the German legal code, the Reichsgesetzblatt. And 13 translators flunked. So they were going to ship us back. Some did go back. I was assigned to a new position with the same old detachment I had been with, but my job was to organize and make possible meetings between clients and lawyers, the defense counsels and their clients and witnesses. So I did that for a year and a half.
How did that work? So, for example, there were 12 subsequent trials, and you were basically assigned and paid by the United States government to work with the attorneys, the German attorneys, who were the defense counsel. Were you assigned to specific cases, or generally a pool?
No, had an office with an assistant, and the counsels would come in and ask to make appointments to see this or that client, and I would arrange that with people in the prison. They would bring the individual up, and they would have an interview. And the place of interview, there's a picture of it right over there. There was a kind of a grill between them.
Okay, there we go. When you came back from the IMT, prior to going back to Nuremberg, were people curious about your job?
Oh, yes. Especially my relatives. Very curious.
What did they ask? What was...
Well, they asked about my meetings with some of the major accused, convicted. They also asked me about the German people. While there, I had occasion to go back through my hometown, Saarbrücken. I somehow got to be on a convoy to go to Luxembourg to pick up German prisoners of war who came to Nuremberg to work in the prison. So I got to see my hometown, which I was delighted to see in rubble. I instinctively stepped aside. I don't know why, I didn't have a chance to think about it, but he was an imposing man. He was walking fast, and I was sort of in the dream world. But I resented that. I still resent that, the fact that I was intimidated by this man. But I was.
Did you have any chance to interface with any of the other defendants?
Yes, a little bit, but menial little things. For instance, our detachment had taken their immediate belongings when they were arrested. There was a storage room. And sometimes one of the officers might have to talk to them about things of that sort. And they took me along to interpret. But that's about it.
Ernst Kaltenbrunner, I'm looking at a picture of him right now, and he had that big scar on his face. I mean, that had to be an imposing, or at least
Well, he was tall, but he was hardly imposing at this point. He was no longer wearing a uniform, and by this time he was a stooped, elderly man. Just really quite different from Goering, who physically was not as imposing. He was terribly obese, lost 50 pounds while in prison, but he had his shoulders back and his head up. Whereas Kaltenbrunner, one of the worst of the criminals, was already stooped and tired looking, and obviously aware of what happened to him.
What about Stryker?
Oh. Stryker, as I say, was not only repugnant to just about everyone in the world, but even to his co-defendants who didn't feel he belonged with them. One, he wasn't terribly important. He made a lot of noise, said a lot of horrible things, but he was provably stupid and crude, vulgar, so that he was even resented by his co-defendants. I never talked to him, but as you see him in the pictures, he looks like a little old man. But you have to contrast that with pictures of him in his glory, where he's barrel-chested, he has a uniform, he walks around with a whip, and boots, of course. It's amazing what happens to people when you take their boots away.